Now we're going to change gears slightly. And Mary and Stan, this question is for you. We'll start with Mary. What are you seeing as the best strategies for addressing racial injustice in our community? Mary?
All right, thank you. I'll start with something very basic. We need to start by getting to know each other in ways that will help us alleviate fear and sometimes just plain ignorance. We are so isolated in our homes, and the use of technology keeps us from interacting with others on a personal level. It may be busyness at work, but we're missing an opportunity to build a community where people feel safe. It's my belief, and those in my field, that cultural competency should be the norm for every institution. How do you get along with people? What are you doing in the school systems, the university setting, medical, government, as well as in the corporate world? Ongoing education on cultural differences should be available in the classrooms and the workplace. Oftentimes, we're called in to work with organizations because they've encountered a challenge, because there's some form of discrimination, and it's because someone in the workplace doesn't understand what's appropriate and inappropriate. Also, sabotage takes place, or there's a lack of trust. So we're called in to help try and rebuild those relationships. We should challenge our organizations and institutions to implement policies that promote racial equality by encouraging and establishing inclusive practices. And if we don't see it occurring, we need to say something about it. Within the workplace, you can do a number of things by certainly hiring, retaining individuals that represent diverse opinions, backgrounds, and beliefs, and to make certain that if you are in the corporate setting, that the board members, those in decision-making positions, are individuals who are diverse, but also who are open to sharing power. We can also work with the media to certainly change that as well, and just because it's printed, we shouldn't accept that. You're paying for this print, and we should encourage those who have the ability to influence or even broker those relationships to do so. Within the school systems, we are always talking to educators about diversity as it relates to understanding the children that we are now educating, who are coming from very different backgrounds and experiences. So there are a number of ways in which we can do it. Even in the neighborhoods, there used to be the program to welcome your neighbor, to say hello no matter what background they came from. So we need to reestablish those kind of experiences again, and certainly celebrate the rich traditions and experiences that we all bring to the table.
Very good. Stan?
Probably the three main things, and they're pretty much the focus of the FCFC movement, are employment, education, and economic development. Black communities have suffered disinvestment, redlining, the closing of supermarkets, the closing of banks, bank branches, things like that. We need to stop that. We need to have the suburbs invest their wisdom and resources in running the inner city schools. We need to get rid of housing discrimination. Where you live matters. We need transportation so people can get to where the jobs are, since the jobs aren't where they used to be. Regarding incarceration, we need to do more education and reentry. We incarcerate huge numbers of people in America, and a disproportionate number of African Americans. Essentially results in casting people into the outer darkness of permanent unemployment. So we need to essentially make up for maybe what was lost in schooling, the so-called school to prison pipeline. We need to stop that. with regard to criminal justice and policing. Driving, walking, running, talking while black should not be crimes. The norm that one must, quote, assume the position in the face of abuse. We don't need that. Different communities doing different ways. The chief in Dayton certainly seems to be trying to do something about that more than Baltimore and Ferguson and those kinds of places, but anywhere is vulnerable to possible reaction to police abuse. We need cultural change. We need to deal with the substance abuse that's found not just in black communities, but certainly gets people incarcerated. We don't deal very well with substance abuse. We need to have the media preventing fear of a black planet kind of things and a culture of violence. And we need to do what Mary said, and that's bring interactions between people of different cultures. We need to promote institutions that restore the worth of black people that was lost through slavery and Jim Crow. There's Kwanzaa every year. We should take that stuff seriously. It's really worthwhile. And we need to recognize implicit bias that's out there. It's not just traditional racism and burning crosses. Implicit bias has been recognized by a Harvard test and things like that. We need to make sure that there's enough to go around. And last of all, we need to deal with the civil rights laws. They were great for dealing with Jim Crow legal segregation, and as interpreted by courts that we elect or our elected officials appoint, they don't deal with the situation we have today. We need to improve the civil rights laws and make them more meaningful.
Okay. All right, so staying with this topic slightly, when we consider the three focus areas, education and life skills, health and safety, income and stability, how does institutional discrimination impact services, people, and outcomes in those three areas? And Stan, we're going to start with you, move to Mary, and then conclude with Jan.
Okay, again, institutional discrimination promotes surplus, marginalized people who react in ways that the rest of us disapprove of and create a downward cycle that needs to be interrupted. Again, implicit biases, historical perceptions of stereotypes are found in employment, in criminal justice, in education, and in healthcare. Again, the schools with African American children in them, particularly Dayton, a segregated community, they need more investment, and they get less investment. The suburbs and the universities need to take responsibility for improving urban schools. Early preschool, we've talked about that. We need sufficient numbers of caring adults, and we need to pay to staff efforts to make up for deficiencies where they exist. We can't tolerate or create bad health care outcomes. Poverty brings bad health. We talked about that. We need enough productive jobs paying a living wage so everybody can get one and is not dependent on social services. The trend is actually the opposite, that there is less employment, less jobs, and the jobs that there are becoming more contingent. So we need to rethink a safety net for a world where people aren't working full-time jobs as we traditionally know them, where employment is contingent, as needed, and scarce. In addition, African Americans lost huge amounts of wealth in the foreclosure crisis, which was just one example of inadequate regulation of the marketplace and the substitution of debt for wages. It became predatory because it was allowed to, and as a result, just all kinds of wealth that people really depended on for their futures was lost to foreclosure. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Very good. All right. Mary, if you could talk a little bit about institutional discrimination.
Certainly. In my view, it impacts all areas because services aren't always located in convenient areas within certain neighborhoods. The lack of quality nutritional foods in many of our neighborhoods is a growing concern. for individuals who don't have access to a vehicle or public transportation during certain times of the day, it makes it even a bigger problem because grocers within their communities don't provide a variety of choice or reasonable costs. Shops in high poverty areas tend to be mom and pop shops, pawn shops, dollar stores. It is alarming to me that a Target can say that it does not make money in a neighborhood when the dollar stores are thriving in those same neighborhoods. There are places that provide some employment, but not enough in those communities. And because many of our neighbors and those friends in certain communities are transit, there's less pride sometimes in one's home and community, and it's more difficult to build trusting relationships and be successful in school, as we've already talked about. As well as affordable or decent housing is a challenge within those neighborhoods as well, with the redlining that was just spoken about a moment ago. Even in some neighborhoods, the lack of outlets for activities and exercise and cultural experiences is an issue that people have just accepted and have done absolutely nothing about it. I believe it's shameful to have schools in our neighborhoods that are closed during the summer when we talk about the fact that there are opportunities for outlets. We need to have something for our children to do in the summer, yet we have these massive new buildings that we've built that remain closed during the summer instead of utilizing them for families and children. And then certainly through these institutional practices, we deal with chronic illness, heart disease, diabetes that Michelle has already talked about. And unfortunately, these things become accepted in certain neighborhoods.
All right, and Jan, if you could conclude this question.
So I'm going to probably get in trouble over this one. I think some of the worst institutional discrimination toward poor folks happens, comes from the institutions that are set up to serve poor folks. You know, we've got, the middle class makes the rules and enforces the rules. And for the poor folks who have to engage in a middle class system that they don't understand the language of, Ruby Payne has studied that. And from my experience, that's right on the money. So to the poor person, the rules look completely crazy and arbitrary, and they're siloed programs. One doesn't necessarily support the other. And it makes no sense to folks who are in poverty and they're going to the institution that's supposed to be there to help them, and they get little slivers of help. And God forbid that they violate a rule, because they're going to get kicked out of that piece of the system. And then their whole world falls apart. So I'm on work experience program, I'm getting cash assistance, and for some reason, my child care gets cut off. And I don't have any place to put my kids, but if I don't show up at work the next day or for that month, and I have to work, say, 151 hours in order to qualify for my cash assistance, then I'm going to be cut off even from the cash assistance, because the child care side of it didn't talk to the WEP side of it. Okay, that's not anybody's fault. That's the system problem. And again, it's the system that I think is holding people back, because it's not a rational system that aligns around the family. Rather, you've got to conform to the system, which I think is fundamentally discriminatory. And until that changes, and until the people who make the rules, the politicians and the state officials, it's mostly the politicians, until they recognize that they're doing harm and they're not helping families move the needle the way they could be, then we're not going to make any difference in this. So I could go on and on. I mean, one other example, I've got 18 seconds here. If you're on work experience and you don't have a GED and you know you want to go to college someday, you don't have the time while you're doing the work that's required, which is probably going to be folding clothes at Goodwill for 3 years. And that's the work experience and the job preparation you're going to get from this program. If you don't have a GED and no time to get one, you can't get into Sinclair or to a program that's going to help you advance skills. Okay? So we've got to have, I know, but we've got to have some thought in the way these systems are administered beyond the county level, above the county. It's not a county problem, it's a state problem.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate your passion. Everybody does.
Okay.
I'm sorry. The clock.
You gave me a forum, you know, so.
All right, so moving on to question 7, and we're evolving here. So we've heard from you, and the question, I suppose, precedes the conversation, that many people are afraid or ashamed to seek help, to come out of the shadows. What can be done to bring people out of the shadows to seek the help? And Mary, we're going to start with you this time.
Okay. First of all, we must change the way we talk about and discuss individuals and families who struggle or live in poverty. As we seek to identify ways to change one's condition, I think it's important that we change the language so that it's culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate, and refrain from judgment and use encouragement, because words have power. Words have power. Ongoing information should be provided to legislators, administrators, leaders, and staff about forms of disparity. There still exists the fear of discovery, and we were just talking, I think this is appropriate to follow up with you, Jan, dating back to when it was the welfare system. It was felt that if you accumulated certain things, you were chastised for it. Even if you tried to do a little bit better for yourself, such as if you've got a vehicle or something that didn't look right on paper, you were chastised for it. And so therefore, people weren't willing to disclose those things, or even in some cases try. So we've got to look at developing partnerships and support relationships that drive action, in my opinion. And so looking at ways that we can serve communities where people are. If there is a need for health care, it should be in those communities. They shouldn't have to get on a bus and have to go somewhere else to try and get support. That way, the counselors in the schools are able to know what's needed, and we can send them right to those health centers near their schools or where they actually live. And also providing some preventive medical attention and dental care that might be needed for young people as well, so that they don't miss out in school. But as long as we continue to have this stigma attached to one's challenges, fewer individuals and families will suffer. When we stop this, fewer individuals and families will suffer in silence.
Michelle, we're curious to see how you considered this question.
Sure, and I've been very brief, so this one's very personal for me, and if Jan was in trouble, I'm about to get a really bad spanking. I, too, it's a common theme you heard up here, grew up in what people would consider extreme poverty, 2 generations, raised in a house that was 956 square feet, 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms. And 9 years of college. I am now living in an affluent neighborhood where you could stuff our old house in my basement. So I thought I had escaped all of that. And a year ago, April, I lost my nephew to a heroin overdose. Now, there's a reason why I'm telling you this. First of all, I will not let his life go as something that was not important. He had every check mark. He didn't make it out of the neighborhood. He had every check mark of every box that the clients that we serve have. He had a learning disability, had a lisp. He wasn't pretty. Got in trouble very early. Just check. Got in trouble with the law, spent some time in prison, came home, tried really hard to reform his life. So a year ago, April, his mother is critically ill, and my mother is her caregiver, and my other sister has passed away, so it's just me and my mom. And I get a call that I had lost him. And when you get that kind of call, you literally roll out of bed with your pajamas on, your hair blown up, no makeup, and you go to wherever it is you're supposed to get your family member. So when I rolled up on this scene, I looked like everyone else in my neighborhood. I looked really rough, and I was treated horribly. And I will not disparage anybody in Dayton because I live here by choice, and I happen to think one of the worst things about Dayton is how we talk about it. And so I was rolled up to identify his body, which I had to do 3 times. And I was undiscernible from everyone else in the neighborhood. And from the coroner's office to the police officers to on down the road, it was amazing the change in service I received from that day to the day I showed up with my suit on and was recognized as the CEO of the food bank. And I was ashamed of how we treat our clients. And Jan is right. We shoot ourselves in the foot. We bring our own bias, we bring our own prejudice, and we do things that we shouldn't do to our clients who make them afraid and ashamed to ask for help. So my example is just to reinforce everything that Jan told you, and I believe everything she said is to be true.
Thank you.
Yep.
Angel.
Living in poverty is embarrassing. So we definitely do need to be more conscious about the things that we say around the individuals that we're meant to serve. We need to have a better understanding of how the cultures that we work with are affected and what their beliefs are about asking for help. It can be embarrassing for an individual to be singled out. And so one of the things that I would like to see more of is us as agencies going to where these people are, engaging in more community events that include everybody in different types of communities. I think that sometimes we're afraid to go in some of those places. I think that sometimes some people are afraid to go into some of those places where poverty is more prevalent. But getting out there and showing people, hey, we do care, we know that you need some help, and we're not just gonna sit back and not do anything about it, I think would make a big difference. I meet people where they are all the time, and that may be at a meal site, that may be on the west side of town in an abandoned building next to a drug house. And I find that my clients are able to relate to me more when I tell them sometimes my personal experiences, and I also find that it really kind of blows some of them away that I'm willing to come and I'm willing to sit there with them and give them the information that they need. Unfortunately, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I think that there's a lack of communication between some of the agencies. I know that a lot of people don't know what we do, and these are agencies that I feel like should know what we do. And so I think that we need to communicate better within our agencies so that we can serve people and get kind of a understanding of the type of people that this agency deals with, and maybe what some of the barriers for their clients are, and then we'll be able to bring people out more and maybe stop them from being so ashamed and afraid to ask for help.
Thank you very much. Jan.
I stumbled over the wording of this question when I first got into this, because it kind of implies that there's something wrong with the people. And I think we need to flip this around. When folks are treated badly by the system, the word spreads. and people know who to avoid, which caseworkers to avoid if they can at the job center, for example, because some are more punitive than others. We've got a client whose child was very, very ill and at Children's Medical Center, and the caseworker wouldn't let her not go to her job that day to sit with her child in the hospital. She was terrified that she was going to lose her benefits if she went to be with her child at the hospital. Now, I don't know exactly what the situation is, but the fact is that there was no compassion felt by that client to even ask if she could do that. So and people know out there that they're going to give up a lot if they have to turn themselves in to the public assistance folks at the job center or wherever. So I think we need to start doing some retraining. I think we need to reinsert compassion into the system. I think we need to teach people about it was said earlier, how we've got folks who don't understand that formal register, the language that's used, and the rules that are set up, as opposed to folks who use a very informal register. And we need to get to know folks. That's been said. We need to reinsert some respect and some compassion into these systems. And then folks will come in if indeed they believe that their lives are going to really change because of it. And that's what our objectives should be, I think, is change, not subsistence. Because these programs breed dependence.
Okay. All right, let's move on to our 8th question. So you're king or queen of the world. What is the rule or regulation you would eliminate today, if you could? And what simple change might you make? And then how would that kingly or queenly gesture impact our 3 focus areas? And this time, Jan, we're going to move from right to left. So if you would begin.
Okay, very simply, I would eliminate restrictive federal and state work experience requirements that are connected to the cash assistance and the SNAP programs and replace them with comprehensive aligned funding sources that promote change through 2-generation models that provide useful job preparation assistance that actually improves people's chances of leaving poverty and moving toward self-sufficiency, and improves the well-being of their children and their children's futures.
Very nice. Angel. So if you're queen tomorrow, what would you change?
I would think that I would make things more accessible to individuals that are not only in poverty, but also individuals who are trying to get out of poverty, making things easier for them in a sense that if I go to the job center and I need some help, I may not be able to get that because I make too much, but things are not always taken into consideration that I have a car and I have to make that car payment in order to keep my job, or I have to pay that full coverage because I'm renting, I'm trying to buy that car. I think that these rules need to be revamped. They need to be relooked at by individuals who are going through some of these things. And I think that would make a difference. And also taking into consideration all of the things that people need. They need their ID, their social security card, their birth certificate. People living in poverty don't always have all of those things, so maybe laxing up on the rules a little bit for them or assisting them with getting those types of things so that they could obtain the benefits and the housing and everything that they do need. And I think that would help out across all those areas.
Mary, what would you do?
Well, I'm going to come from the standpoint or the perspective of a funder. I would eliminate individual funding to one or few programs. I would want to create a culture of collaboration across the Miami Valley. by incorporating collaborative funding that would include government, corporate, any type of foundation funding. Too often, we in the nonprofit community work in silos, and so I, again, say we are well-intended trying to impact change, but it is my belief that the funders have the ability to influence change at a greater level when organizations and individuals are incentivized to work together, to seek creative and sustaining changes throughout our community. And so it would be my choice to bring the best of the best together, the best of the brightest minds together, and say, this is the issue that we have to address. Who else in this community can help you to resolve it? And that's how you would incentivize the change in the community.
Michelle.
Well, first of all, Beth, I'm a queen every day. That's straight. The one thing, and again, I want go off script just a little. The one thing I would do is raise sustainable wage. I think until you take minimum wage and raise it to, and there's two numbers, right? 13 if you pay 100% of health care, or 15 is the cliff. Until you raise sustainable wage, minimum wage, you would eliminate a bunch of our line, and you would have working poor that are now working families that could be more successful.
Stan?
People need to believe they have access to political power to affect change through a democratic process if they're going to become civically involved in improving their communities. If they perceive that a minority is able to rig the system in their favor, they won't get emotionally involved. So I would change two democracy issues, the Citizen United Bilotti line of Supreme Court decisions that allow unlimited private funding of elections, and also eliminate the ability to gerrymander districts so that people's votes, in most cases, don't really matter. Political power, then, will hopefully, the community will get involved and lead to all the things these folks have said.
Thank you. Kathy?
I have a suggestion that would probably not be popular, so I'll probably get, also spanked, whipped, or whatever, and I won't be queen
We're
for
going to
the day.
have a room full of
I
detention
know.
after this session.
It's something that people have known is inaccurate and wrong since its creation. We need to change the federal definition of poverty. And I've been harping on it for years. Lots of people talk about it. Lots of people write about it. It's inaccurate. It never was accurate. Within a year of it being published, even the person who created it said it was inaccurate. She made a lot of mistakes. She overestimated food. They did it in the 1960s, and life today is a lot different than it was back then. Now, I have to argue with my students that, yes, even people in poverty need to have access to a cell phone, right? They didn't include the cost of cell phones in the 1960s. I think we need to change it, and we've created situations then. And if we do change it, what is that going to mean? It's going to mean that we increase poverty. It's going to mean that our jobs are more difficult, but they already are. I appreciated your comments on the working poor, right? The working poor are struggling. They're the ones that meet whatever the United States criteria is for working, and they're trying really, really hard, but they can never really get out of poverty because they can't get the same assistance that other people do. And then what we end up doing is giving assistance based on 100% of the poverty rate, 140%, 200%. And in a study of middle-class Americans, first of all, most middle-class Americans thought that the poverty line for a family of four was $28,000. They had no idea what the real number was. When they asked them what they thought the poverty line should be, they said $35,000. These are middle-class Americans, and the median income is about $55,000. And if you know anyone, and some of you in the audience may be, a family of four on $35,000 is really difficult to try to maintain in our country. Right. So what I'm suggesting actually would increase the poverty. And then finally, I see it playing a role right now in Medicaid. So we have a number that you can't make more than to get Medicaid in Ohio. I've sat with students and family members and calculated how much they would have to earn, because they would have to go on the market and buy affordable health care, how much they would have to earn to be able to have a decent wage and also health insurance. And it would be a lot. It would be like about $25,000, $26,000. And so to go from a job of $12,000 to $16,000 to a job of $25,000 to $26,000, even the $15 hour living wage is not going to put a dent in that. So we've actually created a model where a lot of people are better off to make a poverty wage because they need the good health insurance. And I know numerous people suffering from chronic diseases that they're better off to stay poor and at least get fully funded health care. And we've created a situation of that. So I would change the definition of poverty.
Very good, very specific. All right, we've come to our final question, panelists. And that is, in summary, based on everything you've heard today, other than more funding, what would you add? What would you change? What would you stop to what we're currently doing in the community today? So other than more funding, add, change, or stop. Michelle, let's start with you.
So I jotted some notes down, and I think there were some reoccurring themes. One was stop putting, or continue doing the good work that we're doing, but stop putting so much emphasis on reactive and start being proactive in terms of bringing people out of poverty and shortening the line. I think you heard several good strategies that we could use to do that. And, you know, nobody likes to be forced to do anything, but I think forcing the folks that you fund to collaborate for clients and on behalf of clients is something that we need to do.
Dan.
One thing I get out of this is certainly the panel is the choir, and I suspect that the audience is also the choir. That is, we have a small group of people who believe the kinds of things we've been talking about, but there's a lot of people out there who don't. So essentially, we have to preach to the people who aren't in the choir and convince them that these things need to happen. There are a couple of recurring themes. One is that the welfare reform of '96, which is now 20 years old, is not working to do anything but make life really difficult for poor people, and it has not been seriously challenged by anybody. A 5-year time limit, 20 years later, the work requirement hassles that Heath and I have been back and forth on on behalf of many clients, but only a small fraction, I think, of the people who really have those problems. And the failure to really make these work requirements lead to self-sufficiency, all of those things are abject failures. And there's really nobody out there talking about how we need to re-examine welfare reform. So that would be one thing. The other is a living wage for all working people. We're having the opposite tendency in the society, that there's less employment, there are more unemployable people, more people being excluded because of their criminal records or their immigration status or their age. The retirement age is actually being lowered in terms of when people can get jobs. All of that needs to change, and that requires, I think, rethinking a lot of our economy and how we divide the productivity that we all contribute to.
Thank you. All right, Mary, we'll go to you next, and then Angel.
Okay, so beside funding, I think it's imperative that we begin reinvesting in relationship building, specifically in our neighborhoods, where individuals may have conditions that are not the best. They certainly have the ability to get themselves out of it with the help and support of others. But if you don't know people, you aren't in those communities, you'll never have the opportunity to try and help or encourage or even persuade someone to change their situation. So I think there's an opportunity to invest in relationships, and investing in relationships doesn't cost anything. You don't need more funding for that. It's just, how do you now interact with people perhaps that you don't see on a daily basis? Go into those communities, go into those homes. There are leaders in those communities. They may not talk the way we talk, they may not look the way we talk, they may be a little raw, but at the same time, they know they want to change their situation, and they have the ability to do so with the appropriate encouragement and support.
All right, Angel.
I think that it's very important that we need to stop singling out individuals, making them feel as if poverty is something to be ashamed of, watch our words with the individuals that we interact with. I also agree with Mary in the sense that we need to get out there more in the community where these people are and sit down and really find out what's going on with them. Unfortunately, because of people's criminal backgrounds and things of that nature, it does make things harder for them when they are seeking employment. So I think that it should be required that employers take a look at those types of things too. That's about it. And we need to be serious too. We hear what people say, but are we really hearing what they're saying? Are we really understanding where they are coming from? You know, and do we just take that conversation and do we think later on when we're at home, oh, well, that's really sad? Or do we get up the next day and we take the examples that they gave us and we try, and the things that they want to see happen, and we try to help them get to where they want to be?
Thank you. All right, Jan, and then we'll end with Kathy.
Well, in addition to every important thing that's been said, I would add that our community needs a full-blown commitment to reducing generational poverty on the same level as we have committed to the Learn to Earn goals and strategies. Because I don't think we can achieve the Learn to Earn goals without addressing generational poverty. It can't happen, and the stakes are pretty critical if we don't get there. And now is our opportunity to do that. There are models out there. You know, I've been hawking to Jen, seems to have some legs out there in the rest of the world. We need to really commit ourselves as a community to looking at the models for change and start rethinking the system and how it's affecting the people who are our future.
Kathy.
When I was thinking about it, thinking about this panel, we really have the wrong people on this panel. We really should have people in our community who are struggling with poverty answer these questions. And I think that's part of the problem, and I really appreciate, I had written down right before Janet actually talked about empathy and compassion. And I do talks for college professors on being empathetic. And I think we've lost that ability when it comes to working and understanding the poor. And empathetic means the ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person. But to really do that, the actual definition is that you have to get to know them first. And you have to also understand the social context where they come from. And like everyone on the panel, a lot of us have experienced poverty. And you know, I really struggle with this poor people values and middle class values. I'm not a fan of Ruby Payne. We've kind of glorified middle class values, and I think there's a lot of things wrong with middle class values. And there's a whole lot wrong with upper class values, right? We have to buy to have a life. We live in big homes. We move to the suburbs, and we disengage from our communities. I think we have a lot to learn from those in poverty, which means we have to take time to listen. There's a lot of good about being poor as well, a lot of good about the values. I'm Appalachian. My family, they'll drop everything for another person. They'll miss work to go to a funeral for a third cousin, a fourth cousin. I mean, family and kinship's really important. And we have downplayed the importance of their values to where we're talking about that our values are better. In the end, I think we have to listen. And where are the voices of the poor in this situation and in this discussion? And we need to hear from them. And I remember when my husband lost his job 5 years ago, and both my kids were chronically ill all at the same time. And I come from a middle-class family. I have a middle-class register. I probably even have a higher register sometimes. And I had helped people fill out and work with the unemployment office and food stamps. But when it came time for our family, I couldn't figure it out. I got treated terrible. I had stigma. My husband actually, a grown man, was crying after talking to the unemployment office on the phone. We couldn't get help or assistance. So I called one of my students in poverty, and they came to our house and they helped us navigate the system. They knew more about it than I did. And if it weren't for that student, I think we would have just been stigmatized so much that we wouldn't have done anything. It taught me a really valuable lesson. It always has. We have to stop and listen to the people in our community, just like we listen to our friends. They have a lot to say, and they're not participating because we're not taking time to listen.
I want to thank all of you for your compassion and your passion and your hard work. Now I'm going to turn the microphone back to Tom. And I want to thank all of you and remind you, please, if you have thoughts or questions, comments, something that you didn't hear us discuss, or you want to add to the discussion, to please write them on your index cards, and Kimma and Rita are in the back to collect them from you.
Hey, so I want to thank everyone as well. I particularly want to thank the panelists. You know, I heard a little bit of a theme this afternoon about people getting in trouble. No. This is not about getting in trouble. We appreciate your candor. We appreciate your honesty. Quite frankly, we created this venue because we really want honest input and feedback. That's why we invited you today. We wanted to hear what you had to say. You know, we did the work of the needs assessment. But the needs assessment is a sort of a one-dimensional document that includes statistics, it includes information. Yes, it's built on interviews, focus groups, all of those things. But we wanted to add life to it by having people speak to the things that they've seen, they've experienced, they've worked with clients, personal experiences, all of the things that you brought to life today. So we really appreciate that. You know, I know I'm speaking on behalf of Tom, who had to leave early, speaking on behalf of the county. But, oh, Tom, I'm sorry, you are, okay. Thank you very much. Beth, thank you for facilitating. Now I have a couple of housekeeping kinds of things. If you didn't sign in when you arrived, please sign in as you're leaving, simply so that we have a record of how many people attended today. Also make sure that you get your parking passes so that you get out of the garage free. That's very important. Beth talked to you at the beginning of the session about the cards. Comments, questions, feedback, please complete cards. Rita and Kimma have a couple of red baskets at the back of the room. Feel free to leave your cards in those baskets. Looks like Kathleen has the basket now. Please feel free to leave those in the baskets so we can fold them into the ongoing work. And I guess that's it. Thank you again. Oh, I'm sorry. As you can see on the screen, we have 2 more sessions scheduled. We have one here tomorrow from 3 to 5:30. And the final one, very importantly, on Thursday is not here. It is in Kettering at the National Composite Center. Okay? Thank you very much.